Hi everyone, welcome to another massive darkness painting video. This time we'll be painting the Werewolf, one of the Kickstarter exclusives. The first thing I've done is my usual two-tone prime, using Chaos Black from below and then Corax White from above at a 45-degree angle. I'm doing a custom snow base for the Werewolf, so I've cut the wolf from the base, which is very easy to do with this model. I want something to be under his hand, so I have a piece of tree bark that I'm going to use as a rock. This isn't special basing material, I literally just ripped this off a tree outside my house. Once I have it positioned where I want it, I'm tracing around it with a marker. To glue this down, I'm going to be using my basing mud. This particular stuff is Vallejo earth. Once it's in the right spot, I'm going to eventually cover over the rest of the base, but I'm leaving space to reattach the feet. I'm also going to drop on a few extra rocks right into the mud. Before that even dries, I'm reattaching the wolf with some super glue, and then I'm going to finish off the base with the Vallejo earth. I'm going to give that an hour or so to dry because I don't want any of this to rub off by accident while I'm painting. Next I'm going to paint the fur and the body using 5 different colors. I'm using the two-tone prime as a guide to create some light and shadow. Starting off, I'm using Celestra Grey on all the areas with black paint. I'm not using this on the shaggy mane around the neck or the tufts found on the arms and legs or the tail, just the main body. Next I'm switching to Ulthuan Grey, and I'm using this to paint all the lighter areas of the main body. I'm not bothering to wet blend these together yet, I'm just getting the paint on. Here's the wolf so far, and you might be able to see that there are some harsh lines between light and dark that I'm now going to smooth over. Add some more water or medium tier paints until both the Celestra Grey and Ulthuan Grey are roughly a glaze. Using this, I'm going to brush over the lines where the two colors meet to blend the colors together. I'm using the Ulthuan Grey and brushing from the Celestra Grey into the Ulthuan Grey. You can also do it the other way or add a bit more of each to their respective sides and then wet blend the two together. Next I'm painting the teeth, and for this I'm going to be using Screaming Skull. Now I'm going to be painting the gums of the wolf. I don't see a gum line, but I'm going to paint one in anyway. All creatures look more fearsome when you can see their gums. I'm using a bit of Khardic Flesh from P3, and then I'm going to mix in a little bit of Calgar Blue to desaturate it. I'm just tracing a thin line all around the teeth and the inner mouth. I've still got the grey and Screaming Skull on my palette, so I can touch up any mistakes. Next I've got the other 3 shades of greys that I'm going to use for the mane and the tufts of fur. Starting from lightest to darkest, I have Stormvermin Fur, Skavenblight Dinge, and then half Skavenblight, half Abaddon Black. I'm starting off by painting in the dark areas of the mane with Skavenblight Dinge. For the really dark areas where I want to increase the amount of shadow, I'm going to grab some of the black and Skavenblight mix and I'm going to dab that into those areas. Once I'm done with the Skavenblight, I'm switching to Stormvermin Fur. I'm painting all of the light areas with this color. Where the edges meet, I'm pretty much just mashing the colors together, so I am wet blending in this case. If your paint is thin enough, the upper surface of the hairs will be slightly lighter and you won't need to highlight or dry brush it later. For the tufts of fur on the arms and legs and the hairs on the chinny chin, I'm just using some pure Skavenblight Dinge. For the tail, I'm doing the exact same thing I did with the mane. Stormvermin Fur on top, Skavenblight Dinge underneath, and a little bit of black mixed in to the darkest spots to emphasize the shadows. For the skull and the hip, I'm using more of the Screaming Skull. I'm using 2 different colors for the torn pants. For all the brightly primed areas, I'm using XV88. For the darker regions, I'm going to switch to Mournfang Brown. Then I'll just wet blend the edges together. The claws are getting painted with German Grey. Next I'm switching to washes. The first one I'm using is Reikland Flesh Shade on the teeth and the gums. For the entire body and hair, I'm using a 3-to-1 mix of Nuln Oil and Drakenhof Nightshade, and then I'm adding 2 parts water. By watering this down, I can control how dark the shade gets. Also, when washing over an area that's brightly colored, I prefer to use a thin wash so that there's not a lot of staining. And speaking of that, you want to keep this wash moving on the body. Finish one area before moving on to the next. Drakenhof Nightshade is bad for leaving tide marks, so don't let it sit too long in an area that you don't want to have shadow, like the tops of the arms and the shoulders. Once I have a single layer on that I'm happy with, I'm going back to the spots where there's some shagginess of the fur that I want to show through. I'm also darkening up the shadows under the neck and in the mane with a second layer of wash. For the skull and the pants, I'm using some undiluted Agrax Earthshade. I'm letting all that dry and then finishing the last base color. I'm painting all the jewelry scattered around on this figure with Blighted Gold. Next I'm doing the eyes. First I'm laying down a coat of Evil Sunz Scarlet over the entire eye. Then I'm just taking a tiny bit of Wild Rider Red and marking out the center of each eye where I want there to be a bit of a glow. And finally I used a 50-50 mix of Wild Rider Red and Cygnus Yellow and put a smaller dot in the center as well. If you make any mistakes, I recommend some Eshin Grey to make any touch-ups. So the washes are done and now it's time for a bit of highlighting. This figure doesn't require a lot in my opinion, since a lot of time was spent taking advantage of the two-tone prime and the shading. I'm first going to brighten up the very top of the face, arms, and shoulders with the original Ulthuan Grey. I'm also going to use a bit of Eshin Grey to paint the tip of the nose. I knew something didn't look quite right with the face, and I think that was it. And then just going back to the Ulthuan Grey, painting the tops of the hands and any areas that you want to make pop. Now I'm going back to the Screaming Skull for the teeth. I'm only highlighting the top row of the teeth. I want to emphasize the overbite and the upper canines. For most of this I'm just dabbing the paint to make it look like there are separate teeth. There's a bit of definition there, but not enough for the wash alone to bring that out. The skull is also getting a thin layer of the Screaming Skull, and I'm brushing this mostly upward from the bottom of the skull to the top. And finally, just some XV88 on the upper surface of the folds and the fabric of the pants. So not a lot of highlighting on this guy at all. It's really not required since so much time was spent on the base coat and the shading. Now moving on to the base. These are the colors I'm going to be using for the rocks and the dirt. All the rocks are getting painted with a 2-to-1 mix of Mechanicus Standard Grey and Stegodon Scale Green. After the rocks are dry, I'm giving them one layer of dry brush with Celestra Grey. I'm covering these mostly with snow, so there's no point getting too crazy with the highlights. Next I'm adding a bit of shadow to the underside of the large rock with some Nuln Oil. The dirt is first getting completely covered in a layer of Dryad Bark. Once that's dried, I'm going to do 2 layers of dry brushing. The first one is Steel Legion Drab, and the second one will be a lighter dry brush of Zandri Dust. And finally, I'm going all around the rim of the base with some German Grey. Before I do any of the snow effects, I'm first going to spray the entire miniature with some matte varnish. Here's what I'm using to finish off the base: some Valhalla Blizzard, some Wasteland Tufts from Army Painter, and some cheap powdered snow flock. I'm first putting down the tufts by dipping the bottom in a bit of super glue. Then using an old brush, I'm spreading around some of the Valhalla Blizzard snow texture. Next, I've got some PVA glue mixed with water, and I'm covering the surfaces where I'd like some powdered snow buildup. Now, this powdered snow turned out to be total crap. It was meant for model railroads, and the crystals were way too big. I ended up wiping most of it off, and I went right back to my normal snow basing material, baking soda. So there you have it, the Werewolf from Massive Darkness. A special thanks as always to my patrons who keep me motivated to make these videos and help decide which miniatures will be painted. If you want to join our community, come find us on Patreon. I hope you enjoyed this video and thank you for watching.